As winter fog rolled across the Donetsk front, Russian commanders believed they'd finally been handed a gift. Thick, blinding mist settled over the fields and tree lanes near Pokrovsk, swallowing roads, masking movement, and muting the ever-present hum of Ukrainian surveillance drones. To Moscow, this looked like opportunity, a natural shield, a chance to move men and machines unseen. So they advanced, and that decision sealed their fate, because the fog didn't protect them. It betrayed them. On February 1st, Ukrainian forces turned what Russia believed was cover into a killing ground. As multiple Russian assault groups pushed forward to the mist toward Pokrovsk and nearby settlements, they walked straight into a layered Ukrainian trap built not on visibility, but on precision, coordination, and dominance of the airspace below the clouds. What followed was not a battle. It was a collapse. Nearly 4 Russian platoons were thrown into the assault in a single day. Dozens of troops, a mix of vehicles ranging from military ATVs to motorcycles, and even civilian cars pressed into service. Clear evidence of how strained Russian logistics had become. They moved in columns, assuming the fog would shield them from detection. But Ukrainian drones don't need clear skies. They hunt by sound, heat, movement patterns, and coordination from multiple units working in real time. The first strikes came fast. FPV drones pierced the fog like predators, slamming into vehicles before their crews even realized they'd been spotted. Explosions flashed white against the snow-covered ground. Engines burned. Columns stalled. Panic spread. And once the movement stopped, the killing accelerated. Ukrainian National Guard units, including the Spartan Brigade, coordinated with elite drone operators to dismantle the assault piece by piece. Within hours, Russian momentum evaporated. Assault troops were pinned down in open terrain with nowhere to hide. Some attempted to flee. Others froze, hoping the fog might still save them. It didn't. By the end of the day, the numbers told a brutal story. Roughly 90 Russian assault troops had been committed. Around 80 never left the battlefield. Vehicles littered the snow, destroyed ATVs, wrecked motorcycles, burned out cars. This wasn't a failed probe. It was an annihilation. Drone footage later released showed just how complete the disaster was. FPV drones threading through fog, so thick the ground was barely visible, striking targets at point-blank range. Bombs dropped from above onto clusters of troops who never saw the threat coming. In one haunting sequence, a lone Russian soldier in white winter camouflage tried to outrun a pursuing drone through sparse trees. He didn't make it. Few did. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Just a day earlier, similar Russian mechanized assaults in the same direction met the same fate. Different units. Same outcome. Ukrainian defenses identified movement early, allowed Russian forces to advance just far enough to commit, then erase them with drones, artillery coordination, and precision strikes. Time after time, Russia tried to push. Time after time, Ukraine shut the door, often before close combat even began. This pattern has repeated for months around Pokrovsk. Russian assaults form. They move. They vanish. Ukrainian commanders have been blunt about it. In the overwhelming majority of engagements, Russian units are destroyed before they ever reach Ukrainian positions. Fog, darkness, weather, none of it changes the equation anymore. What Russia once hoped would neutralize Ukrainian advantages has instead highlighted them, because this battlefield no longer belongs to those who see best. It belongs to those who see everything. And if you're following this war to understand how modern combat is truly changing, how technology, adaptation, and precision are rewriting the rules, make sure you're subscribed. What happened in this fog is not an exception. It's a warning. And what comes next near Pokrovsk may be even more devastating. The disaster in the fog didn't happen by accident. It was a result of a system Ukraine has been quietly perfecting for months around Pokrovsk, a system designed not just to stop Russian assaults, but to consume them. By early 2025, Russian commanders had grown desperate in this sector. Pokrovsk isn't just another town on the map. It's a logistical hinge. Rail lines, supply roads, rotation routes, all of them feed Ukrainian forces holding the wider Donetsk front. Moscow understands this. Take Pokrovsk, and Ukraine's defensive spine in the region weakens. Fail here, and Russian forces keep bleeding for nothing. So Russia changed tactics. Gone were large armored spearheads. In their place came what Moscow hoped would be adaptive assaults. Small units, mixed mobility, fast movement, and weather exploitation. Motorcycles instead of APCs. Civilian vehicles instead of IFVs. Fog instead of smoke cover. On paper, it looked clever. In reality, it was suicidal. Ukraine had already mapped every approach route, every tree line, every depression in the terrain. When fog rolled in, Ukrainian commanders didn't panic. They leaned in. Thermal optics don't care about mist. Acoustic sensors don't need visibility. Drone operators don't rely on eyesight alone anymore. They rely on patterns. And Russian assaults are nothing if not predictable. As Russian units entered the fog, Ukrainian forces deliberately held fire. They let the columns stretch, let spacing collapse, let confusion grow. Only once Russian troops were fully committed, too deep to retreat quickly, too spread out to defend effectively, did Ukraine strike. FPV drones went first, targeting vehicles in the middle and rear of the columns. Mobility kills, engines destroyed, routes blocked. Suddenly, Russian troops were trapped in a white void, with no idea where the threat was coming from. Then came the follow-up waves. Loitering munitions, dropped explosives, precision artillery strikes cued by drones hovering just above the fog line. What made this engagement especially devastating was coordination. Ukrainian National Guard units, including elements of the Spartan Brigade, worked in lockstep with specialized drone teams. This wasn't chaotic resistance. It was industrialized destruction. Each drone operator knew their sector. Each strike fed real-time data back into a shared command network. Russian losses weren't just inflicted. They were measured, tracked, and exploited. Russian soldiers tried everything once the trap closed. Some abandoned vehicles and ran. Others huddled near wrecks, hoping debris would provide cover. A few attempted to hide in tree lanes, not realizing Ukrainian drones were already above them, watching heat signatures bloom against the cold ground. In several recorded instances, Russian troops were eliminated within minutes of dismounting. There was no front line, no safe direction, only exposure. By the time the fog began to lift, the battlefield told the story clearly. Burned vehicles dotted the snow. Bodies lay where units had tried and failed to regroup. Radios were silent. Entire assault elements had ceased to exist. And this was just one day. What makes Pokrovsk especially lethal for Russian forces is repetition. Ukraine doesn't just repel assaults. It studies them. Every failed push teaches Ukrainian commanders more about Russian timing, composition, and desperation. And Russia keeps feeding the machine. Day after day, understrength units are ordered forward with inadequate support, outdated tactics, and false confidence in conditions that no longer matter. Fog used to be an equalizer. Now it's a multiplier for the side that owns a drone layer. And Russia doesn't. What happened outside Pokrovsk wasn't just a tactical failure. It was proof that Russian forces have lost the ability to surprise, outmaneuver, or overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. Even when nature seems to be on their side, the fog didn't hide them. It isolated them. And Ukraine exploited every second of it. And the most unsettling part? Ukrainian commanders believe this was only a preview, because the systems that erase these assaults are still expanding. More drones, better sensors, faster coordination, and Russia, somehow, keeps walking straight into it. By the time Russian commanders realized what Pokrovsk had become, it was already too late, because Pokrovsk is no longer just a defensive line. It's a grinder, a place where Russian assaults don't merely fail. They vanish. After the fog disaster, Russian units didn't pull back. They doubled down. That decision may go down as one of the most costly miscalculations of the entire Eastern campaign. Why? Because Pokrovsk sits at the intersection of three fatal pressures now crushing Russia's army at the same time: manpower exhaustion, tactical stagnation, and technological inferiority. Let's start with manpower. By early 2025, Russian assault units pushing toward Pokrovsk were no longer drawn from well-rested formations. They were composites, patchwork platoons stitched together from survivors of previous failures. Mobilized reservists mixed with penal units. Contract soldiers rotated back into combat with barely weeks of recovery. Some had already been wounded once or twice. Morale wasn't just low, it was brittle. Ukrainian intelligence knew this. Intercepts revealed Russian troops openly discussing fog assaults as lottery attacks. Missions where survival felt random. That mindset matters. When soldiers expect chaos, they lose initiative. When they expect death, they stop adapting. And Ukraine exploited that psychological collapse with ruthless efficiency. Instead of responding to Russian movements, Ukrainian forces began anticipating them. Drone reconnaissance mapped staging areas days in advance. Heat signatures revealed vehicles warming engines long before movement orders were issued. Radio traffic spikes signaled imminent assaults. By the time Russian units stepped off, Ukrainian operators already knew where they would be in 10 minutes and where they would die. Then there's tactics. Russia keeps trying to solve a 2025 battlefield with 1980s logic. Push forward, absorb losses, advance by meters. But Pokrovsk isn't terrain you can brute force anymore. Every road is watched. Every tree line is indexed. Every approach corridor has overlapping kill zones. Not just from artillery, but from FPV drones, loitering munitions, and rapid response fire teams. When fog returns, Russian commanders still believe it levels the playing field. In reality, it tilts it sharply in Ukraine's favor. Thermal optics cut through mist. AI-assisted target recognition doesn't care about visibility. Drone pilots don't see targets anymore, they track them. Once a Russian unit is detected, it stays detected, fog or not. And that leads to the most dangerous shift of all, tempo dominance. Ukraine controls when fights happen. Russia reacts. At Pokrovsk, Ukrainian units deliberately allow Russian assaults to advance just far enough to collapse under their own weight. Too close for artillery to disengage. Too far to retreat quickly. Once trapped, the destruction unfolds in layers. First mobility kills, then personnel strikes, then mop-up operations that leave no unit cohesion behind. What emerges is a terrifying pattern for Moscow. Russian assaults don't just fail tactically, they fail structurally. Entire units disappear from the order of battle. Commanders are killed or rotated out. Replacement units arrive with no local knowledge and repeat the same mistakes. Pokrovsk doesn't just consume soldiers, it erases experience. And now, even Russian military bloggers are starting to admit it. Pro-war channels that once promised breakthroughs now talk about unfavorable terrain and temporary setbacks. Translation: they don't know how to fix this. There is no new tactic waiting in reserve. No fresh doctrine ready to deploy. No technological leap coming to save them. Because Ukraine keeps evolving and Russia keeps improvising. That asymmetry is lethal. Pokrovsk has become proof of a larger truth about this war. Russia can still attack, but it can no longer learn fast enough. And in modern warfare, the side that adapts slower doesn't just lose ground, it loses entire formations. And here's the part that should worry the Kremlin most. What's happening at Pokrovsk isn't unique anymore. The same fog trap tactics, the same drone-dominated kill zones, the same layered defenses are now being replicated across the front. What began as localized innovation is turning into doctrine. Ukraine is no longer reacting to Russia's war. It's rewriting how the war is fought, which raises a terrifying question for Moscow. If Pokrovsk is what happens when Ukraine perfects the system on a single axis, what happens when it's fully scaled everywhere? Because the fog will come again. Russia will attack again. And next time, the losses may be even worse. The fog over the Donbass always lifts eventually. But what it reveals now is something Moscow can no longer hide. Pokrovsk was supposed to be a stepping stone, a pressure point, another name on a map to be ground down by numbers and persistence. Instead, it became a warning, written in wrecked vehicles, scattered equipment, and assault units that never reported back. Because what happened there wasn't just a battlefield loss. It was a doctrinal collapse. For decades, Russian military planning has relied on one core belief, that mass momentum and tolerance for losses would eventually overwhelm any defense. That belief carried them through Chechnya, Georgia, and parts of Syria. But in Ukraine, and especially around Pokrovsk, that formula has finally expired. Fog didn't protect Russian troops. Numbers didn't save them. Speed didn't matter. Every advantage they thought they had was neutralized or turned against them, and that's the part that changes everything. Ukraine didn't win at Pokrovsk by being stronger. It won by being smarter, faster, and more adaptive. This is a battlefield where drones see through weather, where AI-assisted targeting compresses decision-making into seconds, where command chains that hesitate for minutes are already dead. A battlefield where old instincts, push forward, probe defenses, advance undercover, aren't just outdated, they're suicidal. Russian forces walked into the fog, believing it would blind Ukraine. Instead, it blinded them to the reality of the war they're fighting now. And above it all looms a strategic nightmare for the Kremlin. Every failed assault like Pokrovsk doesn't just cost men and machines. It drains something far more precious: offensive credibility. Units lose confidence. Commanders lose authority. Replacements inherit fear instead of experience. And slowly, inevitably, the question spreads through the ranks. If this didn't work, what will? That question has no answer left. Even Vladimir Putin understands what that means. A war can survive losses. It can survive setbacks. But it cannot survive the moment its army no longer believes progress is possible. And Pokrovsk may be remembered as that moment, because once an offensive army stops believing, it doesn't advance. It bleeds in place. The fog will return again. Russia will try again. It always does. But next time, Ukrainian operators won't just be ready, they'll be waiting, with refined kill zones, with better coordination, with systems trained on the lessons written in blood outside Pokrovsk. And here's the chilling cliffhanger. What you've just seen is not the peak of Ukraine's adaptation. The technology is accelerating. The tactics are spreading. And what worked in fog around Pokrovsk is already being tested in forest urban zones and deep rear areas Russia thought were untouchable. So the real question isn't whether Russia can take Pokrovsk. It's whether Russia can survive a war where every battlefield now looks like Pokrovsk. And in the next chapter, we'll uncover the next evolution already unfolding, one that can make assaults like this impossible anywhere along the front. If you want to understand where this war is truly heading, if you don't want to miss the moment the balance finally snaps, subscribe now, because what comes next may decide everything.